Hey folks, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on the show. What if the key to an extraordinary life is becoming radically, unapologetically yourself? Today we're here with the one and only Ben Greenfield, a man who's been pushing the boundaries of human performance for decades. It's hard to believe it's been nearly 14 years since I first got a call out of the blue from a young Ben Greenfield, and I still to this day have no idea how he got my number, but we've known each other as fellow fitness nerds through many stages of life, celebrating wins together, and we've even thrown each other a couple of alley-oops. But Ben is not just another fitness guru and ninja warrior. He's a devoted father and Renaissance man who writes fiction, plays guitar, snowboards, and knows how to survive in the wilderness in style. There's no one quite like Ben Greenfield, and I'm grateful to call him a friend. Before we get to the interview, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and sign up for my newsletter at abeljames.com. That's ABELJames.com for updates about upcoming live events and more. And for an ad-free version of this show and more behind-the-scenes goodies, check out my Substack at abeljames.substack.com. Also, I really appreciate all of you who have reached out over the past couple months with the well wishes. Long story short, I was injured in a freak hit and run car wreck. They still haven't found the guy as far as I know, but I'm a tough old bird and I'm recovering well with lots of stories to share as I write my new book about longevity at the same time. So it'll be interesting, and thanks once again for reaching out. I appreciate all of you. All right, on to the show with Ben. You're about to discover Ben's latest adventures with Botox, blood boys, and biohacking blunders, tips for raising a healthy family in the age of tech overload, Ben's strategy for reversing arterial calcification and plaque deposition, the advantage of being weird, and much more. Let's go hang with Ben. Welcome back, folks. The one and only Ben Greenfield is in the house. Biohacking maestro, devoted father, boundless author, and the guy who races cheetahs for cardio and sprints faster than your Wi-Fi. We both go back to the days of when podcasting was audio only and often downloaded not to iPhones, but iPods. We have so much in common and are also delightfully different. And it's a pleasure to be with you today, my dude. Thanks for being here, Ben.
Thanks, man. Did you say Cheetos?
Cheetos. Somebody said Cheetos. But I was thinking about this.
Cheetos.
Cheetos works too. So we can race 4 Cheetos, right? There's nothing wrong with that for an endurance event of some kind. But we've known each other. I was trying to think about it, but 13 or 14 years. Do you remember the first time we crossed paths?
Man, now I'm gonna feel like an asshole by saying no, but we've been part of like a bunch of different groups and stuff, but no.
Yeah, well, we've crossed paths so many times over the years, but as I remember the first time, I think I had just spoken at Dave Asprey's Bulletproof conference back then about music in the brain.
Oh my gosh, you're right. Like back when the whatever it was called, the Bulletproof conference, it was like you and me and maybe like 20 people in a little side room in San Francisco. Like I heard the other week, like he had like 4,000 people in wherever he did it. So yeah, that was way back in the day. Good memory. Yeah, you talked about music in the brain. I remember that now.
But somehow you got my number out of nowhere. So I get this call afterwards from this unknown number from wherever it was, Idaho or whatever. It's like, hi, this is Ben Greenfield, and I'm going to talk about the pod. And no one had podcasts back then, too. It was just basically like a handful of us. But I remember from all the way back then, you were so well researched, so genuinely curious and interested. And that's something I really respect about you, that you carry forward, and I think inspire others to be that way too. But one thing I did want to ask you, maybe to start off, is the advantages of being weird and getting that pushback maybe early in life, because you were also homeschooled and kind of like doing your own thing for a long time. What can you offer to people out there who are kind of encouraged to be the same and blend in with the pack? You're a strong alternative to that.
Yeah, thanks for the backhanded compliment.
No, it takes one to know one.
Yeah, I was homeschooled, and I do think you can learn quite a bit from the, I believe, article or now book, somewhat viral at one time, called 5 Regrets of the Dying by a palliative care practitioner who basically highlights 5 things that people tend to regret on their deathbeds. One is I wish I'd chosen to be happier. One is I wish I'd chosen to show my true emotions. Let's see. There's the I wish I'd worked less, which I think I'm kind of on that one, because I feel like if you really enjoy what you do, I don't feel like I'm gonna wish I worked less on my deathbed. Let me put it that
It's
way.
kind of semantics at some point too,
yeah,
right?
exactly. I wish I'd stayed in touch with old friends, and then I wish I'd chosen to be my true authentic self instead of who I thought the world expected me to be, which is kind of related to the weirdness piece, like being okay with being weird. And I think that societally, especially if we grow up or frequently operate in scenarios in which we are part of a pretty well-defined tribe from an early age, we tend to learn to fall in line because, frankly, I mean, it's a completely evolutionary or ancestral, whatever you want to call it, mechanism to not want to be ostracized or excommunicated or banished in some way, because of course, I'm sure you've probably talked about this before, and you and I both know about this from the whole like evolutionary biology or paleo type of approach. If you were banished from the village, it would mean death. And even though now, when we are banished from our people, we're probably not going to die because there's a grocery store around the corner. We still get the high heart rate, we get the high blood pressure, we get the cortisol release, we get the change of the genetic transcriptome for an upregulation of inflammatory cytokines and a downregulations of immune protective factors, and all these things that happen that put our bodies into freakout mode. So if you grow up, let's say homeschooled, in a scenario in which you're a little less likely to be ostracized or banished or excommunicated in some way because you've chosen to swim upstream or be weird or defy the status quo, your physiology basically associates a lot less danger with you thinking outside the box, because there's no tribe to get kicked out of, basically. So it's just fine to be dangerous because you're your own person anyways. Thank you very much, I'm okay with being a lone wolf. So I think that you do get a little bit of that with an alternative educational approach in which you don't have to basically swim in the same group as the or I don't know, what do cheetahs do? Run in the same flock as the cheetahs. But yeah, I think I think it's not something that you have to be homeschooled to be able to develop. But I think it's understanding that there's a way to be your own person without being a total social outcast. And I think that that's a good way to raise a kid, to help them really understand that they can be their true authentic self. And it starts with the parent, right? Making sure that your child is loved and seen and heard no matter who they are.
And given that, especially being a father, I know you have a certain stance on technology and keep good distance from it in some cases. But there's kind of this phenomenon of, we were raised before, you and I and our generations, before the front facing camera and a lot of this technology. Essentially, our idea of ourself came mostly from, our small social groups. And now we have this outside in kind of more superficial approach. So like you were saying earlier, how do you, or how do they find their true selves in a sea of that sort of thing, where they may be rewarded for the wrong sorts of things on the internet, and it takes them down a certain path personality wise that's maybe not so natural in some cases?
Yeah, yeah, and I run into that as a parent as well. I think even though I don't have the perfect answer, a few things that we really focus on as parents is, first of all, I'm a big believer that if you make a thing, it becomes a thing. So when we raised our sons, we have twin sons, they're 17 years old now. Their names are River and Taryn. We used a style of parenting that I didn't come up with, but that I think for the most part is called love and logic style parenting. In a nutshell, what it means is you educate your child on the consequences of any decision that they might make in life, and then you let them deal with the consequences. So rather than having like no gluten, no sugar, no snack food type of rule, even though you don't want a ton of that around the house to tempt them, if they decide they're going to go out and whatever, eat 3 cupcakes at Jimmy's birthday party, let them deal with the tummy ache or the poor sleep or whatever else happens as a consequence of that. Or if they decide that they are going to continue to go outside, run around the neighborhood with their shoes off, let them deal with the scrape, the cut, the bruise, etc., that they get on their feet. Or if they're not going to, whatever, apply bug spray, the mosquito bites that they get. And obviously there's limits to that. Like if your toddler is, you know, ambling towards a hot stove, you don't let them like get a 3rd-degree burn and say, I see, I told you. And, you know, you do want to slap their hand away in some situations, but, you know, I don't say no porn in our household. Instead, I educate my sons on websites like yourbrainonporn.com and tell them about the impact that it has societally, on the way that they view the opposite sex, and on what it does to their brains. There is not a no alcohol rule in our home. When our box of Dry Farm wine shows up, you know, every month, we pass around a little shot glass. They get to taste the wines, taste the notes, just like we do with olive oil and vinegar, and let them appreciate and understand that aspect of the culinary universe versus it being, oh, this is just what adults do, and someday you'll get drunk and find out, you know, with your friends at a party. So with screens, it's really the same thing. Like, I educate them about the impact of blue light on circadian rhythmicity, on the difference between digital versus analog relationships, on the importance of, you know, being outside and nature time, etc., on the importance of mitigating your exposure to EMFs. But when they got their first phone, literally it was mom and I going on a date, and we got a phone and left it with them and said, hey, call us if you need anything. This is your phone now, right? It wasn't like, you're 16 and, you know, here's some pom-poms and glitter falling from the ceiling and a giant banner, and, you know, you get to go out and shop for your new phone. It's just like, yo, here's this thing, it's useful. And so we don't really have a screen time rules in our home, but a big part of love and logic is you have to set the example as a parent, right? So if you are educating your child about, let's say, alcohol, and not having a hard and fast no alcohol rule, like mom and I rarely drink more than 1 glass of wine at the dinner table in front of our sons. And occasionally we will have a cocktail or two. And usually that's when we're out on a date, and we are very, you know, cautious about our alcohol use in front of our sons. Another example would be the phone, right? Like if you're looking at your phone to check for that important email, or you don't have your notifications off and the text message comes through at dinner time, your kid pays way more attention to how many times you're looking at your phone during dinner than they do to the words that are coming out of your mouth about screen time mitigation. So yeah, we're just very careful to set a good example, and then not to make screen time usage a big thing. I mean, we have this fantastic, one of my friends came visit the house, and he loves Xbox, and so he just like he goes to Walmart and buys like this $800 Xbox. I don't even know what it is, I've never even used it, but it's upstairs next to the TV. And so, you know, two, you know, 16, 17-year-old boys, they were 16 when he got, you'd think they'd just be up there lounging on the couch in front of this Xbox all day. I've seen them using it twice. And the reason for that, I think, is because we have engineered our entire home and land to be one giant playground. I mean, we've got obstacle course and frisbee golf course, and we converted the barn into pickleball, and we've got a pond with, you know, paddle boards on the edge of it, and there's like, you know, paintball guns and airsoft guns, and like, it's a fun place to be. And I think that, especially for kids, if you engineer the environment to create a lot of more fun options than sitting inside playing video games, that also makes it a little bit easier to have the no screen time rule and have it actually work, because there's so many other fun things beyond screens.
Shifting gears slightly, how far away are we from at least one of the twins beating dad at some sort of game, physically speaking? Where are we at?
So ping pong, I lasted 7 years. And then it was like the what's the guy, the Roger Bannister effect, where one night one of them beat me 22-20, and like the next night his brother beat me.
They found your weak spot.
Yeah, and it was literally after, it was kind of like, yeah, it was like, oh, dad's beatable. All right, here we go. So they beat me in ping pong a few times since then. Let's see, what I've got a pretty good record. We trained for like 8 months last year down in your neck of the woods in Austin for one of those Spartan Deca fits, and I wiped their ass on that one. I was pretty proud about, because I know that won't last too long. Yeah, I don't know. We still work out and stuff together, but At 17, maybe I'm just choosing activities that I know they can't beat me at yet, but so far I'm still the house champion of everything except those two ping pong games. But I know my time will come, but I'm like, seriously, I don't want to sound hubristic, but I take really good care of myself. And I've always had this philosophy. Like, I want to be like the 40, 50-year-old guy and feel and operate like I could in my 20s. And I think having them around does push me a little bit more, but I am proud of the fact that I can still physically outcompete my sons.
Yeah. Well, and some people listening might not be aware of how much of an OG you actually are with all of this. This isn't some like new gimmick that you're obsessed with health. You've literally put in decades and change of studying all sorts of different disciplines and applying that. And I'm curious how much for you in terms of whether it's performance, nutrition, fueling, that sort of thing, has changed, or how much have you changed your approach over the years versus just kind of learning more about how to apply the fundamental principles?
Oh, a ton. I mean, I was the highly masochistic, dude in spandex racing adventure races and Ironman triathlons around the globe for like 15 years. I raced professionally for Spartan, for Reebok for 4 years after that. My average week was easily, and I was still kind of like a minimalist training guy, like even back in the day, mostly because I wanted to make money and run my businesses and be a CEO and not a full-time athlete. So, I was training less than a lot of my peers, but still a solid like 14 to 18 hours a week of just like training. Um, and really, it was taking a deeper dive into biohacking, blood and biomarker tracking, self-quantification, and seeing that I was healthy on the outside, or apparently healthy on the outside, but unhealthy on the inside. That kind of switched my approach to training and exercise overall, meaning dialing things way back. And this really agrees with the research. If you look at a guy like Dr. James O'Keefe, who has found kind of the Goldilocks zone of exercise to be about no more than 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week and no more than 70 minutes of very, very high, hard intensity exercise per week before atherosclerosis kicks in, arterial stiffness, and decreased mortality, which is a paradox for a lot of people who think exercise is healthy, and also something that a lot of people don't need to hear, right? So like, if you're still in, rolling a scooter around Walmart, mode, like what you need to hear is move more and eat less. But if you're exercising really hard like I was, yeah, I mean, I'm still dealing with the implications of that. I was hypogonadal. I had a messed up thyroid, rampant inflammation, a lot of biological issues related to overtraining. So now, I walk. Obviously, I'm walking while I'm talking to you. So I have a treadmill in my office. I walk maybe 1 to 2 hours a day. I lift weights 4 times a week for about an hour. And then I typically have about 3 high intensity interval training sessions of around 20 minutes each week. And then everything else is like, pickleball, tennis, Frisbee golf, hanging out with the kids, sometimes swimming. So it's pretty reasonable compared to what it used to be. But yeah, for me, one of the big things that changed was, more exercise and more fitness is better. And there's a pretty stark difference between, performance and health. Even like, it was funny because last week I was speaking to a professional football team, and all the guys sitting in the front row were like the owners and the managers and the coaches. And they were asking questions about their health and longevity and, inhibiting mTOR pathways and not having excess protein. And every response I gave to them, to all the players in the room, I was like, ignore what I'm about to tell, your coach here or your owner here. Almost everything that increases longevity is not synonymous with increasing performance. And in fact, the two are often not parallel. Like, if you want to be a professional athlete, don't fool yourself into thinking that that's going to track well with a lot of longevity markers. Maybe that's an okay chapter of your life at one time, but I'm certainly not in that chapter of life anymore. So that's one thing. I got pretty hardcore into the keto low carb thing. Did you kind of get on that bandwagon for a while too?
I dipped into it for a while, but I've always been kind of moderate for a maverick.
Yeah, because I mean, like I did the University of Connecticut study with Jeff Volek, where he
Right.
had
Yeah. Yeah.
one
You
group
went
of
hard, dude.
athletes like go high, like 90% fat for 12
Yeah.
months, and then another group of endurance athletes eat what basically what the Gatorade Sports Science Institute was pushing out as carbohydrate recommendations, which I still think are too high, but it's like a 60 to 80% carbohydrate based diet. And the group that followed the low carb keto diet, as did the other group, went in after 12 months and did a battery of exercise tests at University of Connecticut. Like I remember I showed up and they like did muscle biopsy, like a guillotine into the quads, and fat biopsy. I was walking around with a pee jug for 24 hours to collect hormones. We did a stool test. They had me do a VO2 max test, which is basically running until you fall off the back of the treadmill. Then I came in the next morning and they gave me my pre-workout meal, which was basically like one strawberry in a cup of heavy cream. And so that's supposed to last me 3 hours for running on a treadmill because it's ketogenic or whatever. And then I put on, you got to wear a mask that measures your carbon dioxide exhaled and your oxygen consumed to approximate carbon fat burning. And then they had like a needle in the arm for measuring bloods. So I run 3 hours on the treadmill, no TV, no music, staring at a white wall, run 23 miles. And then they did that with all the other athletes. And long story short is what they found out was that if you follow a high fat diet for a longer period of time than what research studies had done in the past, because most studies before that were like 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 20 weeks, whatever. This is a full year. They essentially rewrote the physiology textbooks, displaying that, whereas we thought you could burn like 1 gram of fat per minute, well, it turns out you can burn like 1.5 to 2 grams of fat per minute if you fat adapt and train yourself how to burn fat as a fuel. And of course, a whole bunch of people, including myself, took that and ran with it, literally and figuratively, and began to heavily restrict carbohydrates because, you could do just as good on fats and turn yourself into a fat burning machine. But what they don't tell you, or what tends to fly under the radar at least, is that type of carbohydrate restriction paired with heavy amounts of physical activity can lead to thyroid dysregulation and testosterone dysregulation and lack of proteoglycans for joints and all sorts of issues that I actually experience. So I've kind of come full circle. I'm probably a little bit like you, very omnivorous. I'm pretty wide ranging in terms of my macros. Don't even pay that much attention to them. I'm cognizant of my sugar intake. I wear a CGM on my arm, and I tend to eat kind of like vegetable, protein, fat most of the day, and then do what I call a carb refeed at night, where I save the majority of my carbs for the evening, just because that's usually the most the most socially wide-ranging meal, the meal where you might be out at a restaurant, the meal where you're eating more out with the family. I'm not a Brian Johnson finish dinner at 5 p.m. guy, or 11 a.m. or whenever it is he finishes dinner. So I tend to eat a lot more carbs with dinner. I find it helps with sleep, kind of reloads the liver and the muscle glycogen stores for the workout the next day. Then I'm good to go. So yeah, those are a couple things, like exercising a lot, restricting carbs. Definitely changed my mind on those.
Yeah. Interesting. Very similar to what I've experienced and continue to do. But I'm curious, any surprises from the CGM?
I think most of the surprises a lot of people know about now, but a couple that come to mind are, the slow carb thing, back to the carbs. I was eating some slow carbs, if you were to read like, I don't know, Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Body or whatever, all of them are in there. And I was getting blood glucose spikes. And it turns out I have like an autoimmune white blood cell reaction to beans and legumes. Like my body just does not do well with them. So even though they're slow carbs, the hypercortisolic response that I get from eating a food I'm intolerant or mildly allergic to causes a blood sugar reaction. So that's interesting, and kind of shows you how you can personalize your diet. You don't necessarily want to restrict foods based on your CGM data, but if your CGM data is showing you having a blood sugar spike to foods that you would not expect to spike your blood sugar, you should go get a food allergy test and see if you actually do have a true, IgE, IgA, IgG sensitivity to those tests. Another one is that, we know walking before and after a meal controls blood glucose, which is awesome. And a lot of people know that, as does lifting weights, especially because of the acute weightlifting response, but also the fact that long-term muscle can serve as a metabolic sink and kind of soak up glucose out of the bloodstream. But then cold, for me, beats walking or weightlifting hands down. I mean, the extent to which my blood glucose will stay stable, even after like a Thanksgiving meal style face feeding Cheeto fest, whatever. Getting in cold water is like a cheat code if you're going to go have a big meal, especially a meal that contains an appreciable amount of carbohydrates. And even though a lot of people don't want to go jump in a cold bath after whatever, a hot date out where you punished half of the bread basket, afterwards, it'll have the same effect. So cold was another surprising one. And then two other things that were interesting. One is that I've noticed if I'm fasting and I start to go out and be physically active, if my blood sugar is low, which it can be if you're fasting, you're just totally flat during a workout. But if you have some of those ketones, like liquid ketones, I can go and have a blood glucose of like 50 to 60, which is what you'd expect because they kind of like give your body an alternate fuel source. But it's cool to see it in action and see that it's low on the CGM and see that happen. And then the last thing was I interviewed on my podcast a doctor who specializes in the use of Ozempic and GLP-1 peptides and is into the concept of microdosing with them, which I think is a reasonable idea, using less than a doctor would normally prescribe to kind of skirt some of the GI effects and muscle loss effects, but still get some of the appetite suppression effects. And as I found out from her, like pleiotropic or system-wide effects that go beyond just appetite regulation, like blood pressure, risk of dementia, cognition, cardiovascular health, et cetera. So what I did leading up to that podcast was I got GLP-1 peptide and I injected. I didn't get the full load pen, but I was basically microdosing with it. I, as would be expected, was not very hungry. Even though I wanted to eat, I just didn't have an urge to eat. I was eating a lot less. And so when I'd go to sleep at night, my blood glucose levels were really low. And usually, and this is true for a lot of people, if your blood glucose levels are low, usually you wake up sometime between about 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. And that's like this hypercortisolic response again to cause your liver to release glucose to kind of give you energy to get through the night. But that cortisol wakes you up. And so a lot of people have like wakings in that range because they just didn't eat enough food or didn't eat enough carbs. Another reason why eating carbs with dinner can help with sleep. But because I was using this medication, I wasn't as hungry. So I was having low blood glucose during the night, but I was sleeping like a baby. I would get up in the morning and I'd be like, wait. And I'd look at my blood glucose. I should have woke up at like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. last night because my blood glucose was in the 50s and I just didn't. So that was surprising that there's something about these GLP-1 peptides that help you to almost kind of like using ketones function and do okay, but on low blood glucose, almost like they keep you from being awake and hangry.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Now, what about, I know I've heard you outline some of the protocols that you use to reverse the damages of overtraining, especially as it relates to the heart and circulatory system. What did that look like for you, or what does that still look like?
Yeah, well, in addition to like the arterial stiffness, the atherosclerosis that I was talking about, that Dr. James O'Keefe has produced the lion's share of research about when it comes to how too much exercise can create arterial stiffness. What you also see is if cardiovascular tissue has inflammation or long periods of time with hypoxia or excess workload, as would happen, in somebody like me, an Ironman triathlete or a 6 times a week CrossFitter or a marathoner or anybody who's putting their body through a pretty rigorous workload, you tend to see plaque deposition because that's how the body patches stuff up, right? It is with these foam cells that eventually harden and become plaque as white blood cells migrate to the area to help heal tissue. It's the body's natural healing response. But plaque is plaque, and as plaque progresses, you can get stenosis or a narrowing of the vessel if the plaque really starts to pack on more plaque and start to create just a smaller and smaller diameter garden hose for the blood to pass through. So the good part about this is that when you see plaque deposition in athletes or exercising individuals, it is typically more of what's called stable plaque. Stable plaque is a lot less likely to break loose and cause issues like a stroke or a cardiovascular incident, like a heart attack. But it's still risky. Now, if you were to get a test, you can actually see what kind of plaque deposition that you have. The most common medical test to do this is called a CT angiography. Now, CT angiography is great because it will show you if you have plaque deposition, and a newer test called a Clearly scan, which a lot of doctors now use, will show you not only if you have plaque deposition, but whether that plaque is stable or unstable and where it's at. So that's a super useful test. And I think especially men, who like exercising men who think they're super heart healthy and have a great lipid panel. I fell into that category. It's shocking now how many guys I've seen come out of that test and be like, whoa, I guess I do have issues that I need to work on because my heart's gotten pretty beat up from all these years of training. The problem with the CT angiography is you can't use it to, or you shouldn't use it to track heart health long-term or track plaque long-term because it does involve a pretty massive dose of radiation. However, using that as the first baseline test that you get can tell you a lot because it's the most accurate way to do it. Now then, the question becomes, well, how do I test this going forward? There's another test called a CINT. I just had another follow-up CINT like 2 weeks ago. That stands for Carotid Intima Media Thickness Score. And the CINT uses no radiation, totally non-invasive, dirt cheap, or at least relatively cheap compared to a CT angiography. It's an ultrasound scan of the carotid, as the name implies, on either side of your neck. You get a readout on a screen, and it tells you the plaque in the carotid, which correlates, as long as the practitioner doing it is doing it right and interpreting the data correctly, which nowadays is easy because most of that is done by software, correlates with about 97 to 98% accuracy with the CT angiography. So that's how you can actually test it. And that was where I found when I did the CT angiography and also verified with follow-up CIMTs, I've got plaque deposition. Not because I'm, fat, sick, and unhealthy and eating, we'll change the snack products, Doritos, on the couch tonight. It's just because I'm really pushing myself. So that's great to know. But the question becomes, well, is it a doom scroll? You're just like stuck with this potential, I hate this name, like your potential widowmaker, which is actually one of the vessels that's most problematic. And I actually had like 8% plaque deposition in my LVA, my widowmaker, which sounds like a lot, but I've seen guys with a lot more than that. So what do you do about it? Well, a standard medical approach, which there's a pretty robust body of research to show this actually works, is a low-dose statin combo, typically one called rosuvastatin and one called ezetimibe, combined with a newer drug called a PCSK9 inhibitor, which basically upregulates the density of your LDL receptors to pull LDL out of the blood. The PCSK9 is a twice-a-month injection, and then the low-dose statin, you just take that daily. It's an approach that can work, but as you know, Abel, like with pharmaceuticals, you tend to have to look a little bit more deeply at the long-term implications. In the case of statins, for example, you can see muscle wasting, paradoxically, some atrophy of cardiovascular tissue. You can see loss of CoQ10. Some of this can be mitigated via supplementation, but I think that there are some natural approaches that you can look at and that you can use a CIMT to track before you pull out the bigger guns. So a few of those most promising ones, like I'll give you like the biggest bang for your buck ones. One is high dose niacin. This is the same type of thing that causes flushing because you get such a big, almost like vasodilatory effect. But as you can imagine, that's great for the heart. Eating beets and pomegranate and, even the typical things you'd find in a pre-workout like arginine or a nitric oxide precursor. I mean, for some guys, even like Viagra or, sildenafil or tadalafil or one of the Viagra-like ingredients. All of those are pretty good. And there's no reason you can't stack those together. You have to pay attention to your blood pressure if you do, because sometimes you take too much of that stuff and the blood pressure can drop too low. But niacin is the one that seems to be the biggest sledgehammer, especially for the plaque piece. So that's one, is high dose niacin. Another one is, let me ask you this. Have you been to Japan?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. Great country. And I actually used to race triathlons there. What I used to have for breakfast in Japan was white rice, a seaweed wrap, like the nori seaweed wrap, mustard, and these slimy beans called natto. It's basically like a fermented soybean. And you can make natto. It's kind of laborious. It's like, I've done it before. And let me put it this way. It's easier to buy at the local Asian food market. Anyways, though, natto is chock full of nattokinase. And nattokinase is kind of like a plaque dissolving natural compound. It's like an enzyme that can degrade plaque. So we're not talking about stopping the progression of plaque. We're actually talking about the capability to regress plaque, especially when you've got something that opens up the vasculature like niacin on board. So nattokinase, you can get that as a supplement. You can eat slimy fermented soybeans for breakfast. You can do both, but that'll be another one. Vitamin K in all three forms, incredibly important for not only stopping the progression of plaque, but in some cases it might help with plaque regression. I think vitamin K is a great supplement anyways, just for general health, bone health, teeth health, etc. But vitamin K1, K2, I think the last one was called like menaquinone, something like that. Anyways, there's like 3 different forms, but getting all the different forms of vitamin K, that's another big win. And then magnesium would be the last one that I think is super important. You take those type of things and then you pair them with the lifestyle practices that you would assume would be good. Aerobic exercise, infrared sauna, sweating, hot, cold contrast, anything that's kind of moving blood around the body, the same type of thing an athlete might do on recovery day, that can be super helpful for the plaque piece as well. Long story short is that, if a typical healthy person, I know a lot of your listeners are healthy, Abel, is testing their lipid panel, whatever, Function Health or Cyfox, there's so many companies testing this now, and they're getting good lipids. That doesn't mean everything's okay. And I think especially if you've been pushing your body hard, it's a good idea to get a CT angiography or a CINT. If you show plaque, don't freak out. Don't go to the big shotgun drugs first, at least in my opinion. I'm not a doctor, but I wouldn't. But first try things like niacin, nattokinase, magnesium, adjust your exercise intensity, start hitting the sauna, do some hot, cold contrast, etc. Because you can regress plaque. It's not like I said, it's not a total doom scroll.
What about your risk tolerance for kind of like new or experimental procedures or even proven procedures that you're subjecting yourself to? How do you evaluate these sorts of things and whether they're worth it or not?
I mean, you just inject the stem cells in your penis and see if it turns blue and falls off. And if it does,
typical Tuesday for Ben Greenfield.
Happy wife, happy life thing turns into a really relevant scenario. There, in the whole biohacking industry, at least, there is a certain pioneering component. Not only that, but there's also the component of, I'm taking 50 different supplements and doing, 5 different types of workouts. Who's to say, unless I do a strict washout period, how much of an effect this actually has and how much of it is a combinatorial effect from these other things that I'm doing. So for me personally, I do take a pretty good dive into the research. GPT has made that way easier because it's getting better and better for me to be able to actually say, and I'm totally not, I'm not wanting this to be crass, but this is what comes to mind. The whole like stem cells in the penis thing. When I was down in Austin last time, I went to a place called Austin Regenerative Therapy. There were 2 procedures that they wanted to do on me. that at first glance you might think are totally fringe, like there can't be any research on this type of procedures. One was therapeutic plasma replacement, which you can only do in the state of Texas. This is different than therapeutic plasma exchange, where they take out your plasma and then replace that with albumin and some vitamins and nutrients and minerals. This is actually taking out your plasma and replacing it with, in my case, that of a young, healthy 18 to 25-year-old male donor population. So for 3 days, I sat there and received 10 bags of plasma infusion. And by the way, I felt incredible afterwards. And then the other one was Botox. My wife asked me why I was getting Botox, especially why I was getting Botox in my penis, which is what they do. They call it, what do they call it? It's a horrible name. They call it like Ptox. Ptox. I'm like, why don't you call this like, I told them, why don't you call it bonus or something like Ptox sounds horrible. And my wife's like, why are you injecting a paralytic toxin into your dick? Turns out what the mechanism of action is supposed to be is that it relaxes smooth muscle. And by doing so, because the smooth muscle has become paralyzed to a certain extent, you get increased vasodilatory capacity and more blood flow into the area. So for me, for both of those things, I went and I actually dug into PubMed and looked at, well, is there actual research on therapeutic plasma replacement for longevity or for reducing all-cause risk of mortality? And is there effect of Botox on penile function in men? And it turns out that there actually is a robust body of research on both. So in a situation like that, I think research helps a ton. There's still an N=1 type of component. Granted, a lot of the research is not super long-term, human clinical research. But, so yeah, there is a risk. There is a risk component, certainly. But I do try to pay attention to the research. And then I also will, of course, when you look at the research, and this, Abel, this is a huge problem in the supplements industry. The research will say, well, sure, there's great data on whatever, red Korean natto ginseng or whatever. And so you'll get your supplement, but it turns out they've got 1/12 the dose that's actually used in human research, and they're fairy dusting. And so I'll look at that too. I'll be like, well, is there research that this works? And does this product actually contain or use the modality or ingredient that they actually used in the research?
And you've also injected stem cells in other parts of your body. Tell us about that. And also, it can go wrong, right? So it's worth acknowledging that this isn't something that you should just rush into.
I've been utilizing stem cells in my own health and longevity routine for probably almost 10 years. I've done everything from the full body stem cell protocol in Park City, Utah, with a doctor named Dr. Harry Adelson 3 times, where they go head to toe in every joint with like a bone marrow stem cell soup. I've done stem cell infusions with what are called Muse cells, which are a newer form of stem cell that is capable of transforming into different types of cells for tissue healing, but with a very, very low risk of what's called teratogenicity, which is its potential for causing cancer, which can be an issue with stem cells that have been expanded or grown for too long a period of time. I've combined stem cells with exosomes, which are the little signaling packets that allow stem cells to talk better to the tissues. Probably done just about every type of stem cell therapy that one could get. And it can go wrong. It can go terribly wrong. Gosh, I remember I was down in Florida, and both my wife and I were harvesting our stem cells we're harvesting our fat to store the stem cells from our fat for storage for future injuries, for future therapies, etc. The day after I got my fat cells extracted at this clinic, it was called the American Stem Cell Institute. It's pretty long ago in Florida. They got raided, I believe it was the FDA, for a series of procedures that they'd done in which patients had become blinded by a stem cell procedure gone wrong to the eyes. Another case was with a very well-known medical practitioner who last year nearly died from the same spinal infection that I've seen occur in 3 other individuals, including notable celebrities who have gone to Mexico, typically it's Mexico, to do stem cell treatments in the spine. I can tell you, Abel, that the issue is not the stem cells. It is usually the way in which they are stored, shipped, and handled. So there can be contamination. Although most stem cells these days are pretty pure, it's not the purification process, it's what happens during the handling leading up to the procedure, or the procedure is done improperly or in a sloppy manner. And that is why you really have to do your research before working with anybody. Like, you don't want to just like go to the fly by night budget 2-for-1 clinic in Tijuana or whatever to get stem cells done. You want to go to clinics that have a robust reputation. You want to call people or talk to people who have been there and been treated before. You want to run it by respected physicians in the industry in the regenerative medicine space. So yeah, stem cells are not that dangerous. It's the way that they're administered that can cause issues.
What about, to make this question short, longevity as a death avoidance cult and the alternative to that? I've heard you speak about this in a few ways, and you're also a deeply spiritual man, so I do appreciate sincerely your perspective. So why don't you just rant on that for a bit?
Yeah, it's this idea of grasping at straws to live as long as possible because, at the end of this life, that's all there is, baby. And I think for me, that is a very morbid way to live one's life, based upon the belief or the principle that we are all a bunch of chunks of flesh and blood floating on a giant rock through space, seeing who can make the most money and via Darwinian principles have the most sex, propagate the species, get the most houses, cars, women, bank accounts, fun, you name it. And then at the end of the day, boom, you're gone, you disintegrate, game over. If that's the way that you see life, then I think it can become very tempting to adopt a nearly transhumanistic lens through which you view health and biohacking. I want to live as long as possible. There is nothing after this. I want to almost like play God and figure out how to achieve immortality. And I think we would be fooling ourselves into believing that someone could even live like to 150. I mean, look at how far science and health has progressed in the past 100 years. And the longest human on lifespan, I believe, is 117. I think with all the stem cells and biohacking and protocols in the world, we'd be lucky to get somebody to hit 125, at least in this decade. That may change as technology progresses. And of course, if it changes, then the question becomes, well, is that person who maybe gets to 130 getting to 130, but living those 130 years largely like huddled up inside a hyperbaric chamber, cold and hungry and libidoless and fasting and never swimming with the sharks or getting out in the sunshine or, staying up past their bedtime. So, the question becomes like, what's the quality of those 130 years going to be from a societal and happiness standpoint? So the way that I look at this is I don't do a lot of these things so that I can live as long as possible. I mean, frankly, Abel, if you look at my family genetics, like most of the dudes in my family, like croak when they're somewhere around like early 70s, late 70s, if they're lucky. If I do a good job, I could probably make it to 90. I mean, and I'm not saying that again to stinking thinking to manifest myself dying when I'm 90. I'm just being realistic here for a moment. But I do think that I can live as healthy and as robust and as complete and fulfilled a life as possible, as close to, let's say it is 90, as close to the day of 90 as I possibly can. Like, if I die at 90 after a day of snowboarding, making sweet hot love to my wife, after a meal, a ribeye steak and apple pie, that's great, right? Versus, living an extra 20, 30 years, but not having high quality of life or being just kind of lonely and deprived. So I am a Christian. I believe I'm going to be immortal and that I will have an amazing existence in a new heaven and a new earth surrounded by my friends and my family, having a great time for the rest of my life. I do want to equip myself to make as good an impact as I can while I'm in this body on this planet. but I also am not like grasping desperately at every last second of life because this is all I've got.
Yeah. Now, how about this? I'm sure a lot of people want to paint you into the box of, or put you into the box of just being a fitness guy. But you're largely creative, and you've been into music for a long time. You write creatively. To you, what is the value of that practice? Why do you do it, and why should others consider it?
Well, I mean, we are humans. We thrive on beauty and art, and as you've written about so elegantly, with your work on music and the brain and creativity, it's something that seems to feed not only our soul but our brain in terms of the way that it sparks neurotransmitters and the highly dopaminergic response. I think that especially in the sector of health, we can focus quite a bit on our bodies, but when it comes to, again, life fulfillment and happiness, I mean, I love cooking. I love grilling and sous videing and coming up with new spice rubs and, getting the crispy side of the salmon perfected and the texture of a brisket, just spot on and jiggly like it's supposed to be when it comes out. And I love having 30 people gathered around our big table and singing the doxology at the top of our lungs and saying a prayer and diving in. I love busting out a colorful salad and playing Scrabble and dinner games for an hour with my family at night. Every single night before dinner, I've got my guitar out. Our whole family is stomping our feet and clapping and singing songs and having a wonderful time. My wife and my sons are at the Oregon coast right now. Last night, I was out in the patio all by myself. I was playing guitar to the geese, literally. The geese and the little babies were out there, and I'm cranking out John Denver with a big smile on my face. And I also think that, stale scientific health writing is sure useful, but I love to crank out stories and use my imagination to create fictitious characters. I wrote a book called The Forest, the first of a 5-part fiction series that I'm working on. With my twin sons are the inspiration for the protagonist. It takes place in a magical world where they cross a portal and live the classic hero's journey. And I think sometimes we tend to pigeonhole ourselves into certain categories, like I'm the health guy, or I'm the fitness guy, or I'm the biohacker, or I'm the dancer, or I'm the musician, or I'm the chef, or I'm the secretary, or I'm the accountant. But last time I checked, there wasn't some like life rule that you have to simply excel in one specific category. I certainly think people have gifts that they tend to be granted to by God, that allow them to really touch people's lives in a meaningful way. But that doesn't mean you can't take a whole bunch of other stuff that you even potentially suck at and not derive a great deal of enjoyment out of it, or create a lot of enjoyment in other people's lives from it. So sometimes I think we sell ourselves short. Like we're just like, man, I can't do that. But I mean, you've seen the people who I love it when I see somebody who's like playing an open mic night at my mom's coffee shop and just crushing it. Like there was like a 65-year-old guy the other night doing Irish music. And I come up to him like, dude, when did you start? And he's like, oh, I was 50, or you see somebody who's just like incredible at chess and they started when they were 60, or somebody who started slacklining when they were 70. I mean, like the best time of what's the Chinese proverb? The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago or today. Right. And I think that certainly applies to just all these different things that we can learn. And I pair that with what I was talking about earlier. Right? You do risk FOMO if you decide to be a Renaissance person, especially in an era in which we are just bombarded with information about where we can go and what we can do and what we can learn, and Udemy and Khan and YouTube. And it's like, dude, my head's going to explode. I don't even know where to start. This is where my life philosophy, I think, gives me a lot of peace, because I don't think we're going to be a bunch of like angels sitting on a fluffy cloud playing a harp in heaven. Like the way I read the Bible, for example, is it says it's a new heaven and a new earth. And it's just like where we are now, but made perfect. So I literally believe in my heart, I will be able to play guitar the rest of my life, write books the rest of my life, snowboard, e-foil, climb mountains, whatever. Anything I suck at now, I pretty much have eternity to play around with. So I'm not like super duper desperate in this life to just like have it all, but I do like to dabble and enjoy a lot of stuff. I don't push the panic button though on like having to be proficient at everything or having to try everything, because of that part about me feeling as though immortality is a little bit more or I guess less esoteric and ethereal than a lot of people might think that it is.
Along those lines, in just the couple minutes that we have left, I would love to hear what you think about like a forward-looking skill stack, not only for our generation but also for your boys and the people who come up later. Like what are the essential skills for humans moving forward in an age when AI can do a lot of things better than, or arguably better than humans can?
Yeah. So from an educational standpoint, I really like Naval Ravikant's take on this, which is just a modern twist on the classical education approach. Like if you're, and this is the way that we homeschooled our sons. This is what we really focused on, and kind of let everything else be their passions and interests and desires. A human being should be able to read proficiently, right? Like digest a large amount of information via the written word. They should be able to express their thoughts clearly and efficiently, and preferably elegantly. So basically that's reading and writing. Be able to do rough figuring and arithmetic, not necessarily algebra and calculus, but just have a basic understanding of math and geometry and calculating. Like whatever, if I drill through the wood at this angle, this is where that drill bit's going to pop out. And then some amount of logic and or programming, like understanding if this then that scenarios. Like we accomplished a lot of that through gaming at night. Like we would just play tons of card games and battle games in our house at night, so to better understand, you know, A equals B, B equals C, then A equals C type of scenarios. And then finally rhetoric, like being able to persuade, being able to sell, being able to express your thoughts not only in written word but verbally. So you look at reading, writing, math, logic, and rhetoric as core underlying principles. Passions, interests, and desires based on your unique gifts and callings fall on top of that. And then my twist on that would be two additional things. One that I've done a really good job teaching my sons, one that I'm in the throes of trying to teach them. The one that I've done a good job of is they've been in wilderness survival camp every summer since they were 6. They have, at this point, done 11 years of wilderness and wilderness awareness training, you know, bird language, animal tracking, hunting, fire making, shelter building. They are now teachers, well, not teachers, they're called mentors, almost like TAs at the wilderness survival camp that they went to. So, like, basically, just know how to get dropped off in the woods and fend for yourself. And you don't have to do it when you're a kid. You can learn this at any age. And trust me, it's better to do it outside than to learn it on YouTube and think you know how to do it. Like you actually have to go camping and be cold and figure out how to start a fire when your fingers aren't working. And yeah, so that's one. And then the other would be being able to prompt AI really, really well. And that's a new one. And that's why it's suddenly come up as highly important on my radar for my own personal skill set, for my son's skill set. Like, and that refers to kind of like some of the future you're probably alluding to. Like, you need to be able to delegate to a computer really effectively. It's coming to me quickly because I've always been a Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week guy, you know, in terms of delegation, outsourcing, VAs, and telling other people how to do something for you in a way that gets it done as efficiently as possible. Prompting a computer is pretty similar. And of course, like the giant, like elephant in the room cheat code is anytime I don't know to prompt, I tell AI what I want it to do. And then I say, how can I write this prompt more effectively for you to do this better? And I'm like, technically, if you know how to prompt something to help you write a better prompt, you almost solved your own problem.
Yeah. The true concept of meta. Awesome. Ben, thank you so much for spending time with us here today. What is the best place for people to find the updated version of your book, Boundless, as well as your work and whatever is next to come?
I mean, probably Google, but
probably ChatGPT.
Yeah, probably ChatGPT. My website's bengreenfieldlife.com. And then my book's on Amazon or wherever books are sold.
Awesome. Ben, Thanks so much. Really respect you and appreciate our friendship over the years. Come back anytime.
Cool, dude. Thanks for having me on. Those were awesome questions.
Hey, Abel here one more time. And if you believe in our mission to create a world where health is the norm, not sickness, here are a few things you can do to help keep this show coming your way. Click like, subscribe, and leave a quick review wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts. You can also subscribe to my new Substack channel for an ad-free version of this show in video and audio. That's at abeljames.substack.com. You can also find me on Twitter or X, YouTube, as well as Fountain FM, where you can leave a little crypto in the tip jar. And if you can think of someone you care about who might learn from or enjoy this show, please take a quick moment to share it with them. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.